Greetings. Greetings. I would like to warmly welcome our speakers. In this session dedicated to active design in architecture and placemaking as methods of preventing chronic disease. Health and human-centered urban planning strategy adds human behavior into the planning and design decisions. It may be hard to predict what health-supporting behaviors and lifestyles may arise, but it's easy to show how poor design unintentionally limits people's health. Let me introduce our speakers. David Vlasov, the founder of International Society of Urban Health and the editor-in-chief of Journal of Urban Health, will open the sessions with a 50-minute keynote speech. Then all panelists will have from 5 to 10 minutes to present individually. I'm honored to welcome here Mikhail, the chief endocrinologist of the Ministry of Health of the Russian Federation. Oksana, who is in charge of social initiatives of the Moscow Department of Labor and Social Protection. Itai Palti, the director of Hume and the director of the Center of Conscious Design, and Svetlana, the head of PR at the Moscow City Health Department. This is a truly formidable program. So I would please request all speakers to keep to time so as to respect each other's space. As the founder of the International Society for Urban Health and editor-in-chief of the Journal of Urban Health, I've personally known David Vlasov for a number of years. He's been very supportive of me in setting up a new journal, Cities and Health, where you can find many papers and commentary about urban planning for healthy cities. Over to you, David.
Marcus, first, it's good to see you. I'm sorry it's not in person, and congratulations on your new publication that I just read about. So again, it's very much of a pleasure to me to be invited to Moscow and to participate in this conference. I've had a number of opportunities to speak with people, and it is really a two-way exchange of learning. So I just wanted to start with that. And what I'm hoping is that the slides will come forward. Well, if there are no slides, then I'll start talking. So some of what the title of the program is, if we can go back a few. This is not the first slide. Yeah. There we go. I hope that doesn't take away from my time. Okay. So when we talk about architectural design and urban planning, there are two terms that we need to think about. The first, active design, and the second, placemaking. They're complementary. They're not the same thing. So for active design, we think about how we design neighborhoods, streets, outdoor spaces that can encourage active transportation, right? That means the walking, the cycling that can happen, places for recreation. But it's also indoors in terms of designing buildings that can create opportunities for daily physical activities. And so that is both, right? It's a matter of design. And as part of that design, you know, we think about urban and climate change. And so we want to be able to look at activities in our active design that is going to be sustainable. Placemaking is a complementary term, and for placemaking, it's really more of the process of creating not just active space, but of quality space that people want to live, work, and play, right? So there are a couple of components to that, and the ones that I link up with the most are theme. Can you create a sense of place, right? It's one thing to have, you know, a park, but are people going to use the park? Do they feel that that has ownership, that it has meaning for them? And so it's really creating a process that is inclusive in order to make that design. An example of this that's gone worldwide, and I understand there's a longevity activities here in Moscow, is the age-friendly city. And the age-friendly city is saying, we're going to have people that are elderly for whom the city is not designed. Right? If you have 8 lanes of streets for a person to cross that live on one side, but the greengrocer market is on the other, or you have a park that's on the other side, how is it that a person would be encouraged to do that? And so there are a number of different strategies that we can use in terms of the design of physical space. But there are other things. We have to think of the social kinds of elements in creating communities. And so what's social participation? What's civic participation? And dealing with social isolation. So when we're thinking about active design, it is not just purely you have a place to walk or you have a place to be able to bicycle, but how is it that people can see themselves as a sense of belonging to that space that they can participate? One of the things I was asked to talk about was nudges, right? That's very much in vogue these days to be able to talk about that. And that is, you want to be able to preserve freedom of choice. You don't want to just keep wagging your finger and saying you must do this and you must do that. Are there ways that we can encourage that? And among clinicians, we see this, right? And what you may do is sit down with a patient, for example, and you say, it's going to be important for you to get more exercise. I'm going to write a prescription for you to get exercise, for example. And so will you commit to that? Can I get you to sign or give me a verbal contract? Now that you've done that, let's talk about some of the things that you might do. What are your intentions? Let's talk about that in our conversation. And then after that, you can send reminders the next day, the day after, and you can say, how's it going? Don't forget you need to walk a half hour today. And in that process, it's letting people know about what are the choices and consequences. Right? So this we might think of as the clinical encounter. Right? And what we have found is that that's one approach for nudges. You're nudging people towards things, but they have the freedom of choice in terms of how they actually carry that out. The second way is on the top on the right, which is the use of social norms. And that is, we're all in this together. We get together with our social network. We're all going to go out walking because we have that sense of socialization that we can have as well, not to be isolated. And that's an important. Now, the last three in particular, default rules, simplification, ease, and convenience, right? These are more by design. So, for example, a default rule may be not that you opt in to belong to the gym, but that at work you have to opt out, right? So it's automatic that you're enrolled. And so that way the design is there. You don't have to go anywhere, fill out any forms. That part has made it simple, right? So that's part of the design. So what have we learned from the research on this? Well, again, remember I talked about changing thoughts and feelings, the second, social processes, and the third, interventions that change the behavior. So the thoughts and feelings, such as writing the prescriptions for exercise, one-on-one counseling, the results for that are somewhat disappointing, right? We hope to see better and more, but again, it's not as the solution. The second, the social processes, the results show more process, right? So you want the altruism, sharing. When I worked for the Veterans Administration, they would have a sign by the elevator that said, up 1, down 2. So the idea was Don't go to the elevator, walk up one flight, at least one, and when you're finished, you can walk down two, right? So can we get the social processes where that becomes the norm of what it is we're going to do? The third is, can you change behavior through design? And what that's been shown is reliably effective. And that is, how can you encourage activity without trying to change what people are thinking or feeling? So what are some of these things that can change behavior directly, right? What are some of those things? Well, mixed-use design, right? And this is where you have buildings at scale that are mixed-use. So the first level may be stores, shops, and then apartments that are above. And the idea is that that becomes an area where there's a sense of light, eyes on the street, so it's safe. The scale is comfortable, and we find that with a mixed-use design that people are much more likely to go out, to walk, to socialize, to engage. Safe sidewalks, right? If cars are parking up on the sidewalks, that's a problem. Or do you even have sidewalks? So you want to have paths where people can walk, right? You have to have the design that's there. Separate bicycle lanes, not just that bicycles are going on a sidewalk, that's not good if you want to walk, but also not just flowing in with traffic. Can you create a barrier between where the car traffic is and where the bicycles are? Then you're much more likely to have people feel comfortable that it's safe to be able to do the bicycling. Automobile traffic calming. And we're seeing more and more of this, and that is cars will just be speeding along back and forth and so forth. Can you put in things, not just speed bumps, right? Because that just only takes you so far. But we see more people putting in circles, right? You have to slow down in order to go forward. And so that's something that we're seeing. Also, street closures. Let's just close some of these streets and make them pedestrian and bike friendly. And so that's something that we would want to do. I talked about the defaults and the text reminders of the gym membership, for example. Appealing hallways and stairs. You know, if the stairwell is sort of in the back and, you know, it's the paint is peeling and there's very little lighting, you know, that's not going to encourage people to use the stairs. And so how is it that we can design that? And then what's the distance to healthy food? Because it isn't just physical activity. If you want to lose weight, eat less, eat more healthy, right? You have to walk a long way to lose a pound, right? And so we want to have healthy choices. So those should be in the design. Are they closer to where you are than other food choice designs? So how is it that the architect comes in and starts to look at that together? Here's a study that was done in New York City, and I'll walk you through it. And that is Carol Horowitz looked at a new housing project versus one that was already there. And the idea was that you would have elevators that would have a delayed elevator speed. If you got on, it was going to take some time for you. So if you're in a rush, it'd be faster to go up the stairs. And then the elevators were in a non-prominent location, right? So you had to walk down a hallway to go use this. So again, it's there if you need it for folks with disability. It's absolutely essential. But what about in regular, normal use? So central stairway placements, they were made as wide, well lit. They even had some music playing. And there was nice artwork, particularly local artwork that was put into play. So point of decision prompts, just like the 1 up, 2 down that I just described. And then they put in an indoor gym and outdoor exercise circuit. All right, so if we go to the right, what you'll see are some bar graphs, right? And this is the change in stair use, right? And so the beige, the tan, I'm colorblind, excuse me, that is the house where the changes were made, right? And the blue is the comparison group where there were no changes. And I'm taking you all the way to the right where I made the blue rectangle to show you inside that we had an increase in people that were exercising, right? That increased their stair use compared to the control group, right? So that's very important. Most of the people in the control did not change what they were doing, but the people in the intervention group. So again, there's good evidence that when you do active design, that you really do see the kinds of change. Now, there are other things that architects are coming up with, which is how do you make a good physical design, and some are really doing this with amazing aesthetics, right? So good health design built into the aesthetics of architecture. And this is 3XN's headquarters in Lausanne, and what you see is a prominent stairwell that just seems to take over the whole inside of the building. And what it does is it takes you to each level. It's wide, it's well lit, you can visualize all around. And so what they found was that a threefold increase in pedestrian movement around the building, right? Because this became sort of a central focal point. It was cool. It was neat to be part of this. Now, something else that I've come to learn about is what about inside design, right? There's biophilia, for example, right? How do we bring nature into buildings? And that's good for air, it's good for mental health, it's good for cognitive ability, and also for people to engage in space, right? To make it place. And so there's Jack Spengler at Harvard is a colleague, and a doctoral student actually looked at, well, what are the options? You know, we could go and say, this is a great idea, let's build it, and maybe it worked or maybe it doesn't. But what they did was to set it up as a virtual reality where they would create what that environment could look like. And they took a number of different environments, and then they would take a person's blood pressure, for example, right? And they would do a number of other measures, and that way they could test before they build what might be some of the possibilities that are here. And so to give you an example, Yen, who was one of the doctoral students, had virtual reality in 4 zones. So the top left is non-biophilic, right? What my office might look like. Then B on the right top is you have green on the indoors, right? So plants on the wall. C is outdoor space, right? And frankly, that's my favorite. And then combination, where you have the green and the outdoors, right? And so then the idea was to see how did people physiologically respond to this. Now, I bring this up because there are a few things. One is we can't necessarily access all the sites that we might want to when we have adverse weather. We hope for more indoor gyms and cycling lanes, but that's one part. The other is to say, can we blend active design and the benefits of nature in an environment that's proximal for a person? And so I'm not saying this is what to do here in Moscow right now, not at all. But what I'm trying to say is we've got the ability of looking at science to help us get the information that we need. And I thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, David. Stop that echo. What a wonderful tour around the different evidence base, which is very important, and researchers and funders are really coming in now and looking at this. I love that testing of different options before you do them in the real environment, because it's very expensive to make mistakes in a city or town. so we can test things, and researchers and funders are coming on board now, a lot of this research being published. Now let's turn to Mikhail. Mikhail, you're the chief Russian endocrinologist and one of the leading experts on diabetes. Please tell us more about this non-communicable disease. What challenges do we yet have to overcome, and how could urban interventions help prevent the rise of diabetes? Over to you, Mikhail.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Chairman, dear colleagues. I'm not an architect, but I am actually fully focused on the architecture of the human health. And I think I would reiterate, I'm a physician by my profession, and I actually get focused on the structuring and architecture of the human health. And when you live in a large city, you have to pay attention to those who are healthy and to those who have chronic non-infectious diseases. As this is a cohort of people who need a special approach, and they are our target audience, and thus thinking about the architecture of our cities and towns, we have to think of them first and foremost. And diabetes is the disease of the chronic non-infectious disease, and this is a real serious problem. Altogether, we have about 400,000 registered people with the diabetes, and actually T2D encompasses 363,000, 94%. In the past, we talked about the aged people, elderly people, and the disease of the people having the extra weight, and the disease of coupled with the obesity. And actually, by 2 times over the past few years, we have been witnessing the prevalence of this disease. But in the United States of America, this number is even by 2 times higher. And we have to define 3.9%, and that is what we have as the registered cases, and 1.9 not revealed or disclosed disease, and altogether we're supposed to have 550,000, but 23 is a striking number for any megacity, and these are people who have diabetes and having all the factors of risk, and thus it may gradually be converted into T2D. 3-4 million people have this type of disease, and we have to work with them, and we have to think of them once we start modifying something. Altogether, we have some other peculiarities to mention. The prevalence of diabetes in the aging groups constitutes 15-20%. And if we talk about this percentage, we're talking about the elderly people. And this is a cohort, the subpopulation of people of 85 plus, and it is enhancing. And 9.5% at the level of women and 4.2% for males. And 89 is the average age of these people. And people may live in the mountains with a wonderful atmosphere, and they live in the city. They use the public transportation facilities. But this is a disaster, and for all of us. And when people have extra weight and obesity, that's what we have to work with. And only 30% of the urban population have ideal weight, and 2/3 have extra and weight or obesity. And that is what we have discovered, and thus we should think of the program for modification and thinking about other approaches how to address this challenge. And we joined the program How Cities Combat Diabetes, and by the end of this day we're supposed to sign a special memorandum. Altogether 37 cities and towns take part in that movement. And let me give you some kind of a cross-section from the survey we've provided. And the key idea is to identify socio-cultural factors of vulnerability and also the inquiries of the citizens. On the basis of those inquiries and requirements, we may set up the program of modification. And really, Strelka and other entities worked quite a lot. 192,000 posts and texts were printed in mass media from 4106 platforms. And we've identified 4 blocks which reflect the aspirations of T1 and T2 diabetes. And they want the services of the public catering to be adjusted and adapted to their disease. And they would like to have a rational menu. There should be some drinking water in the street. There should be some accessibility in special places for recreation, so that the diseased person may just have may take food on a regular basis. And also the adaptation of the public space and recreational zones are to be adapted this way. Either they have to be protected from the heat or sheltered from the heat, or protected from the cool weather, and availability and affordability of WCs. It's another block. Adaptation of the transport infrastructure. And if we talk about the patients, the cohort of our citizens which are less active and less mobile, actually they have to think of the pavement not to be slippery, and the phase for traffic lights switch on, switch off should be a longer one, and there should be some bus stops in the vicinity and some extra places and seats at these bus stops. These are very simple things, and that is the public request of our diseased citizens. And it's not that healthcare system has to be concerned about it, but the pertinent committees of the government of Moscow. And accessibility of the sports infrastructure is another case. And thereby, it's worthy to mention swimming pools, cycling tracks, gyms, and also our patients pay attention on the availability of information, where they may find this or that facility, where this or that new venue is going to be opened, how to get there. And this is another issue to be taken into account. And we're talking about the program Moscow Longevity. Already 380 people were encompassed by this program within the 3-year period. And these are demands and these are requests embedded in these 2 charts. And we are showing the urban areas with the good accessibility of sports facilities and recreational areas. Moscow is placed first, but it is placed second as to the availability of sports infrastructure. And that was actually the set of demands we've identified, and they're going to be submitted for the consideration of some pertinent authorities. And we're supposed to be really keen on that. to a large extent. And when our chairman mentioned as how we may transform everything and convert everything, it's a good thing that you construct certain facilities as brand new ones. But what needs to be done with those which need some refitting and renovation? You may actually construct a new ladder in the sports gym, which has been designed especially for the disabled people and diseased people. But if we have a 200-year-old building, what needs to be done there? And so these new approaches are necessitated. I'm wrapping up. Thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you, Mikhail. This is a very important subject for cities all over the world. So it's very interesting to hear the responses in Moscow and the Russian Federation. So moving to Oksana, can you tell us how the nudge concept, which David touched on, is being implemented in Moscow? I hear that the issue that many city residents face, or might face, is that there's not enough time to get them to medical checkups or to do sports regularly, even though there are lots of urban interventions making it possible for everyone to lead a healthy lifestyle. So how is Moscow going to change this? What are you doing to change this?
Добрый день.
Good afternoon, everybody.
Прежде всего, надо сказать о том, что
First of all, I would like to emphasize that Moscow is a mega city with very fast dynamics, and sometimes we do certain things with the detriment of our health. We do not have time to visit the doctor. Always it's a problem and a painstaking issue when we start visiting the doctor. Only 30% of Muscovites didn't attend outpatient clinic last year. But if we talk about some prevention, about the annual checks, last year, the comprehensive examination was provided to the 10% of the population. We go to the doctor when we are forced to do so, when there is no other way. And if we talk about the vaccination, only 11% of Muscovites had been vaccinated. And when the ruling came into effect, the dynamics has immediately went up by dozens of times. And if we talk about the nudging policy, we have an electronic case, medical case, and we may just sign up for vaccination, and we do motivate this particular process. As of the 18th of May, 46 pavilions of that sort have been operating in the 10 administrative districts, and men and women over 18 are eligible for medical examination on a free of charge basis. Thus, they may keep track and control their state and what is needed, the diagnostics of the cardiovascular system, the intestine system, and also the identification of the diabetes. And we provide even a larger spectrum of services, and regionally, right from the outset, people are provided with all the information about their health status so that they may start immediately just doing something if it is necessary. You may visit pavilions without any preliminary signing up. And my colleagues discussed the issue of the health and of the health status. And by the way, we offer all kinds of sports in the morning. In YouTube, we organize our PT exercises, and during weekends, same channels provide the full-fledged training. And what is more substantial to mention about the role of the pavilions is that they are all tied up to the universal internet system, and it is accessible to outpatient clinics, and you may actually may visit every doctor if you are willing to do so. Already we have about 3 million people as an elderly population to be actually covered by that particular services. And the elderly person nowadays have to go into sports. But if, say, 5 or 7 years ago, you saw an elderly person going in for sports, the idea behind was that he was a former sportsman. But nowadays, it all looks different. You really have to take care of your health. About 386,000 people take part in the project Moscow Longevity. Originally, it was designed as a part of some kind of entertainment or recreation. But surprisingly, as it might seem, after the examination and checkups, these particular activities support a lot those people, and we're talking about the moral and physical and cognitive functions, and the prevention of depression tends to be a #1 factor. And we are talking about various approaches, and jointly with the Department of Healthcare, we put forth a very interesting program, the Recipes of Longevity. And whenever a person comes to visit a doctor and gets his recipe, he also gets another recipe for an active lifestyle, with due regard to a specific classifier. Sometimes they do recommend them to sing, to dance, to swim, and we also combat social isolation. We incentivize communication services, as it provides a new spiral of life for the elderly population. And pandemic has become a challenge for the elderly population, and in this case it hasn't become a barrier but the stimulus for the further development. And the Moscow Longevity project actually was a pivotal one for 180 degrees. The task of the past was to put people out and make them stay in the streets. But nowadays it looked all, it turned all upside down. And people have to be safeguarded for depression, for the low mobility. And as we know, people just went to Dutchess at this period of time for 3 or 6 months, and the online format allowed everybody to retain their activity, and we actually had more recipients of that services and information. And this project has by 4 times been increased, and about 40% tend to stay at the online format, and that tends to be a very aptly business for them, and they may actually choose a trainer no matter where everybody is located. And so the nudging policy is the only means to preserve health and to incentivize people to think about their future and tomorrow's business.
Well, thank you, Oksana. It's very interesting to hear about these clinics. And I think I've seen photos across social media of the clinics in Moscow. And also the Moscow Longevity Program seems much needed too. Hopefully it will lead to a demand for more age-friendly placemaking. Itai, you're director at Hume, a company that develops science-based solutions for architecture and urban design. Much needed. We're discussing how providing equal access to social services and creating comfortable urban environments can help make megacities healthier. However, do these solutions really form healthy habits for city dwellers, especially if we're talking about residents with more sedentary lifestyles? What role does public transport and digital technology play in this? Over to you, Itai.
Thank you very much, Marcus, and thank you for inviting me to be on this panel. I'm going to keep my comments pretty short. If you're interested more in my work and our work in merging science and design, you can take a look at my keynote, which I did yesterday. For this session, because we have varied ideas coming out, I'm going to keep mine very specific. And let me just share my screen. Okay. You can see that? Okay. So this is an idea that, as I said, is specific, and it was part of a paper that was published actually in Cities and Health, which Marcus is the editor of, and it's about questioning whether our celebration of mass transit is something we should keep on doing, or should we be questioning whether the structure in which we create our cities is inadvertently creating a culture of transit and moving us away from health. And so, as I said, I think there's a lot of good points that have already been said. And this point is a little bit unorthodox, so questioning whether we should celebrating mass transit as much as we do. And for many cities, it's become the pride of the city. In where I am, for example, in Tel Aviv, we're just starting to build a mass transit system. And I know it's something that is people are very much looking forward to, but I'm hesitant to say whether we're conscious of the change it will create in our lifestyles over time. And so I want to offer a lens which is called the radius of life, and this is something that Ivan Illich wrote in his book, Energy and Equity. And simply to talk about this radius of life, why is it important? Because as our lives get dispersed over a greater area, we see all sorts of detrimental effects brought about by what could be called a culture of transit. And I'll bring attention to some of these symptoms in the hope that we can seriously question whether this norm of modern life is something we should perpetuate by investing further in more transit and working towards higher ridership, or whether there might be alternative routes to reduce our radius of life. And here are some of the effects that we see as people spend more time traversing the city throughout the day. And this is something that is brought about by the structure of the city, by the way we build the infrastructure. The more opportunities we create for us to go from one side of the city to the other, supposedly in quick time, the more that opportunity will be used and cemented into the city, meaning, for example, large companies will centralize their headquarters in a specific place because it's known that it's possible to reach them from all parts of the city. Now, I want to question whether this part of it's possible is the right approach or not, because of course it's possible, but what is the cost? We had some comments about people having not enough time to exercise. Most of the work that I do talks about mental health, but obviously this is something related to physical health as well. Time scarcity, one of the biggest causes of stress, and as said by the last speaker, one of the causes why people don't exercise too. People with long commutes are 33% more likely to suffer depression, meaning less active as well. 40% to get inefficient amount of sleep, and we know that what inefficient amount of sleep does to our health. And also the effect that it has on our relationships, on our personal relationships. Couples who commute more than 40 minutes a day are 45% more likely to get divorced. And, you know, this is what we do in our work when we're marrying science to design. And science is there to really give us headlights, to try and help us connect the dots where things are a little bit too complicated to see on the surface. And to understand why we've already invested so heavily in public transport, we have to look at the conditions that created the need for it. It's hard for us to envisage a city as anything other than a compact center and then decreasingly dense rings of development throughout it. But this topology is something that was created by the car, and it's something that disperses parts of our lives to very distant parts of the cities. Now, along with the car and the zoning policies that created this topology, it also separated the functions of the city and created these compartments for us to get to throughout the day, sometimes many different places around the city, depending on what kind of lifestyle you have. And so the reality created on the ground brought with it huge changes to our way of life, and the commute became a societal norm. Not just that, families and friends become distributed over large parts of the city and communities dispersed, meaning we're much less likely to see people because of the psychological barrier and the psychological stress of going into transport rather than coming out of our homes and being able to walk where we need to. And so we think of public transport as something that is solving the problem that the car created. But I want to suggest that it's not solving, it's actually augmenting and cementing the problem that the car created. By telling communities and people that here is public transport, you have the opportunity to go from one place to the other easily, we're just saying that this is the lifestyle that we have decided to stick with, rather than let's try and understand the effects that the automobile had on the city and whether they are actually creating health or not. And so there are ways that we can retract our radius of life and be less reliant on transport, have more time for us to, for our free time, walk around more and reach places that we need and services that we need, rather than having to stretch out our lives in this manner. And the crux of this lies between the difference between mobility and accessibility. We can create a lot of mobility through transport, but accessibility means making things easier to access without necessarily relying on public transport. And in order to go back to the scale in which we best thrive as individuals and communities, we must revisit our approach to mobility and accessibility. We need to rid ourselves of this culture of transit and transform once again our relationship with distance. So currently we spend a significant amount of time, a significant amount of money on infrastructure and investing in mobility. But what if we use this investment to decrease this radius of life by creating accessibility rather than mobility? And here are some of the examples that would do that. We need to lower the number of times someone needs to travel long distances. That means distributing services rather than centralizing them in one place, finding ways to distribute them to all the different neighborhoods. It means rethinking working, not to centralize all of the offices so that people need to come into one place. How does this new era post-COVID and with the introduction of remote working, how can we use that to change our habits? We need to create jobs in all localities so that they're not concentrated, and we need to create outdoor spaces that are easily accessible so that members of the communities meet and we create social cohesion in place, rather than forcing people to commute for long distances to meet their friends and family. So, and this is really what the 15-minute neighborhood is about. My comments are related to becoming conscious of the fact that increased ridership, which is something that is celebrated in many cities, is not necessarily a sign of progress. It may be a sign that we are getting further away from healthy lifestyles. Can we think of this kind of transportation in the same way that we think about roads? We know that if you build more roads, more cars will come. If you build more infrastructure like public transport, more people will use it, because that is the structure that we will embed into the city. And that's, my comments are very specific on this, but that's the end of what I have to contribute on this.
Thank you. Thank you, Itai. You raised some very critical issues here for us all to think and rethink, often going to the core of what a mayor may feel they've offered to their cities in terms of trams, rapid mass transit, light rail, the sort of legacy of that infrastructure. And also, as you know, echoing the trend to think of slow cities, cities of short distances, and the 15-minute neighborhood. And actually, this really links what David said in his keynote, the link between active design and placemaking. In fact, there's a fluidity between the two. They're not necessarily in distinct camps. They influence each other. Now turning to Svetlana. Svetlana, could you talk about what social initiatives help to increase the share of population that takes responsibility? How can we increase the medical and health literacy and public awareness for the prevention of chronic non-communicable diseases? Over to you, Svetlana.
Marcus, thank you so much. Thank you. I would like to thank all previous speakers for giving us an extremely interesting food for thought. And now in terms of non-chronic contagious diseases, I would like to say that information campaign and increased awareness is playing a great part in reducing the level of these diseases. The well-being of our people is one of our priorities, and information and communication campaign is playing a huge role here. It's a big part of an action plan which is focused on reducing the economic burden caused by chronic non-infectious diseases. How do we motivate our people to have a healthier lifestyle? How do we get away from risks that bring non-infectious and chronic diseases? It's a big problem. It's a challenge faced by professional medical community. It's a challenge faced by our citizens and city dwellers. We believe that intersectoral and interdepartmental interaction will help us make our people more aware of these risks and will push them to reduce these risks. What are these risk factors? Non-balanced food, unhealthy habits like smoking or consuming alcohol, and not enough movement or physical exercise. And in order to increase awareness, we have a focused informational campaign, and this campaign is focused on involving more and more people into healthier lifestyle. We are trying to push our people to go for regular medical checks. And Oksana and Mikhail mentioned already that in Moscow we have all necessary infrastructure that can help every citizen to act responsibly as far as his or her own health is concerned. We have hospitals, we have clinics, we have polyclinics, we have medical pavilions in parks. So Moscow is actually turning into single integrated public space which could be used for the purpose of becoming healthier and healthier. And the purpose of our communication strategy is, again, making people more aware, focusing on preventing risk factors. Given the current outbreak and the pandemic, we have moved this campaign online, and we have an extensive audience which still wants to know more about, to know more about the way to prevent development of these non-contagious and chronic diseases. We have information placed on billboards, on websites, of different medical organizations, and this campaign capitalizes on our medical experts who work on out-of-staff basis. These experts are providing medical recommendations, and we still have to do more in terms of using different interactive technologies, because interactive technologies can better help us get our point across, can get our citizens engaged and get them immersed in this information flow. Biohacking or neural hacking technologies also should be used, and David, I think, has touched upon that. We need to push our people towards healthier behavior. We need to encourage them to choose better sleep patterns. We have a lot of hardworking people in Moscow, and these people tend to eat junk food. And yesterday we mentioned that there is an obesity issue, and we have to popularize eating at home, because that can prompt our people to become more responsible in terms of their own health. And I'd like to give you an example. As Mikhail has previously said, it's very important to create urban environment in which people with diabetes will feel comfortable. So we are focusing on this. We're focusing on this fairly heavily. And we have accounts in social media, and we are using this opportunity again to get our points across, to make sure that our people are taking the right measures to prevent the risk of developing these diseases. We are involving students, we are involving young experts in this. We are holding days for prevention of particular diseases, and again, it's a part of awareness campaign within which we make people aware of proliferation of diabetes. We make them aware about the danger of strokes and other diseases. We work together with journalists and influencers who are trying to convey the same message and the same information to their audience with the sole purpose of making them more aware of the situation. We have good urban environment that fosters people to do morning, or if not morning, then just physical exercises. And we need to cover a larger number of people with these campaigns. And first and foremost, we are focusing on our younger citizens, because we want them to develop healthier patterns of life. We are acting on this together with influencers, with various organizations. Human capital is the most valuable capital that we have, and we have flash mob campaigns which are focused on posting pictures about about a healthy way to celebrate New Year's Eve, like you show whether you exercised or whether you ate Olivier salad. And we are focusing predominantly on the fact that our young doctors are getting the right point across to their audience in social media. And we can see that a larger part of this audience is really well covered by this information. And people are genuinely interested in remaining healthy, because all these chronic diseases, they transform into the burden for our economy, and they have negative demographic consequences. We are also witnessing we are also seeing that the COVID-19 patients, they work through this illness in a different way. So the healthier you are, the easier you work through it. So we have to focus on using modern technologies in order to cover as big an audience as we possibly can. So we've got to engage them, we've got to motivate them, and we've got to push them in the right direction. And I think our medical community and our society needs to focus on this, because there is nothing that stops us from doing it properly in Moscow. There is nothing that stops our city dwellers to exercise. So these public spaces can become spaces of public health. And our young doctors, I'm happy to say that our young doctors are motivating more and more people to become more responsible about their health.
Thank you, Svetlana. I can see some very strong and effective social messaging there. Huge campaign. Well, we have to wrap this session up now. We've only got a minute, but just as a warning, David, I just want to give the floor for you for a final word or two. We talked a lot about various social initiatives aimed at promoting healthy behaviours. Could you just say something by way of making sense of what we've heard about maybe the interplay between the physical interventions in global cities and these social interventions? Back to where you started, maybe. Thank you, David.
Yes. Thank you, Marcus. I think it was an absolutely great collection of presentations that really weaved into each other to create a nice fabric on the issue of the active design, the architectural aspects, but also the importance of making that coherent with the social patterning that needs to happen along with it. The two need to be able to go together. I think I was very impressed with the issue of longevity, right, and the study that's going on, and particularly during this COVID, how to be able to have the technology and to keep people engaged for these activities, right? I think that's a challenge, and one that's well taken. I like the idea of looking at the parks and making them very active spaces, right? People will have services, they have opportunity to be able to come together. And so it isn't just a number of bike paths or hiking trails or whatever, but that it's a place where people can engage with each other. So that's the design element that is taking the physical and the social and putting that together. I was particularly also fascinated with the talk about, mass transportation, because I've just done some studies on that, so I was feeling very personally affected by that. And that's going to be a challenge. We like to have the 15-minute neighborhood, but that may involve quite a bit of restructuring, not only of expectations, but also of resources that are available. So how is it that we put those elements together? And I think the conversations that we've had here have been very stimulating in terms of, and thought-provoking for how we might be able to go forward. Finally, I just want to say how much that I've learned in my short time here about the initiatives in Moscow and just how impressive they are. So thank you.
Thank you, David. What a wonderful session. I just want to thank our keynote speaker, all the panelists, including remote panelists, and also just say thanks to the technical backup that has made this sort of an international hybrid session possible. And thank you to everyone involved in this very important area of research and City for Health work. Cheers.